crazy things happen in our world all the time, things that can make it feel unsafe to dispatch your routes, whether that is a protest like we saw a couple of years ago, or a blizzard that knocks out the city. So today, what I wanted to talk about is what your options are in that scenario, those unexpected situations, and how you can still be successful, and the things you need to just take into account for those decisions. So you have probably heard the saying, rain, snow, sleet, or hail, nothing can stop the US mail. First off, that's not true, but I would also say that there are definitely circumstances that can and should stop your deliveries in a given day. So you are aware, you do have a right to decline service with FedEx. There are certain scenarios that it applies, and it is also a requirement that you give FedEx some heads up there, and advance notice of what your plans are. It is not going to work out for you if you come to them the next day and explain why you didn't deliver yesterday. It needs to be something you talk about in advance and have as much communication as you can. So the first set of kind of scenarios where you can decline, these are outlined in your contract, and these are really more of exceptions. They're things that pop up. So a couple of examples are regular pickups. So there are things like a customer requiring you to rig your truck with special shells for a pickup, or a pickup that is scheduled really late at night, like past 7 o'clock. There are certain things like that that you do have the right to decline. Another example is if there is a pickup with over 200 packages. So there are things like that that just really throw a whack in your normal delivery schedule that you have the right to decline. But really importantly, for things like that, if you do choose to decline those, FedEx has something called the right to ensure delivery, where they will either redirect those packages to another contractor, or they will potentially reassign them to another CSA entirely. So if you do decide to turn off or turn down those kinds of one-off things that are outlined in your contract, they could end up going to another CSA. So sometimes you may keep those annoying stops just to keep them. Now, those are one-offs. You won't see them a bunch. The ones that you'll run into the most often are around weather. So the first question is, can I decline for weather reasons? And the answer is yes. It is always in your power to turn down deliveries for the day, to decline service for that day due to weather. The really important thing to think through, though, is what does that cost there for me? What's the cost to operate? What's the cost not to operate? So if you do not deliver that day, it's a loss of revenue. Plain and simple, there's no getting around it. You still get the service charge, which for those of you who don't know, there's different components of the contract. There are things where you get paid per package and per stop from FedEx. And then there's also something called the service charge, which is an amount that's negotiated and paid flat each week, regardless of volume. So if you don't deliver, you'll still get the service charge, but you will not get those stop or package charges for deliveries that day. Now, you will have to deliver those packages at some point when the weather clears up. Maybe it's a day from now or a week, depending on how bad it is. And you'll get payment for them then. But the important metric to think about and take into account is that at that point, the packages will have stacked up, but you're probably going to end up delivering to the same stops. So you may be taking twice as many packages, but they're probably all going to the same stops. Whereas if you had delivered them on different days, it would have been double the number of stops. And in this space, in this industry, your stop charge is one of the biggest ways you make money. So that loss of stops is a real reduction in revenue as well. So the other thing to take into account if you're not delivering that day is that if FedEx has not said that there's an official weather risk, then it can affect your service score to not deliver those packages. And then that can in turn affect your standing with FedEx. So when they do deem that it's a weather risk to deliver, the way you'll know is that they will make a code available so that you can code a package as not delivered due to weather on your scanner. So the scanner is the device that you'll have on your truck that you have to scan every time you deliver a package. So you would code that delivery as basically, I'm not delivering this due to weather reasons. Sometimes if FedEx hasn't made that code officially available for the day, if there's still weather and you're still uncertain about delivering, sometimes you can talk to the terminal and kind of convince them to make the code available. It doesn't always work, but that's why it's important to always be communicating and talking to the terminal about those kinds of things. So those are the risks if you decide not to operate. So loss in revenue, it may affect your service. The main things on the other side of it to consider are, what are the risks if I do decide to operate? So first thing to think about is obviously you're going to watch the news, try to get as much information as you can. FedEx also has a lot of weather information if you ask for it. So they'll have things like the alternate routes that are available, the weather and road conditions for your service area, and if you're in line haul, the conditions of the destination you're going to. But the cost you need to be thinking about is, how likely is it that my drivers will get in a wreck or injured? Some of that's just a judgment call on the skills of your drivers and their familiarity with driving in things like the snow. 2 inches of snow is dramatically harder to deal with in Georgia than in Boston. So there's that kind of thing to take into account. You also have to take into account how skilled the average regular driver is in your area. Not your contracted drivers, but just the regular people on the road. I can tell you for sure that regardless of how comfortable I feel driving in the snow, you will not catch me out on the interstates in Nashville if it has been snowing, because I know how horrible the average driver is in Nashville in the snow. So it's not just your people you have to take into account, but it's all the other obstacles that come from every other driver who suddenly turns into a projectile because they don't know how to turn or slow down in the snow. So from a cost perspective, you have to take into account not just how much an accident will cost you, but how much that will cost in time, how much it'll cost to have to tow a driver out if they get stuck somewhere, and how a workers' comp claim can affect you both in money and in your workers' comp score and your insurance in the long run. So you take all of that into account. The other thing is, you may find that some of your routes are operable while others aren't. So maybe you send drivers out on the city roads that are salted and plowed, but you hold back the rural routes. Or maybe if you have a driver that you really trust, you think they can handle the snow, whatever it is, you can send them out on a route that may be questionable. And then that driver has the ability to code individual stops if they're just outside of their skill range and they don't want to do it. So they can go up to a stop and say, oh, I've done these, but I'm not going to do this stop. I'm going to code it as a weather stop. But what I would tell you is, if you are fielding a partial route or looking and it's like, I think I can do 20% of this stop. Should I do it? Probably not. Usually from a payroll perspective, doing that limited of a route is going to not be a good use of your time and money, and it's going to hurt you more than help you. It could be a way to clear out some of those packages so that, you can up your stop total like we were talking about earlier. But usually if they can't do a full route, it's not going to necessarily be worth it for you to field a driver that day on the route. As a note though, if your driver does ever, like he's out on the route, like I was just talking about, he comes to a stop, decides it's a weather code, so he's not going to deliver that package. If they ever have to then bring that box back to the terminal because they didn't deliver it, they have to write on the box in Sharpie a couple of things. So it's basically, just think about it as a 2x2 grid. So in the top left, put the code number, the actual number of the code that they coded it as for weather, the date in the top right. In the bottom left, they'll put the work area, which is a number that's really just a number that FedEx uses to designate a certain geography. And then the bottom right, you'll put the unit number of the truck. So what this does is it just makes it where it's really easy for the package handler and for FedEx to see why that box came back and all of the information they need to see to process it. So that's not just for weather. Like I said, anytime you're bringing a box back, weather or any reason that you didn't deliver, make sure you're following through with that process. You will also find that occasionally there are days that the terminal will shut down completely because the weather was so bad that they aren't letting anyone deliver, or maybe the line haul runs aren't even arriving to the terminal, so there's no back boxes to deliver. So in a situation like that, you don't get a choice on whether you're delivering or not. No one's delivering that day. So you're going to get the service charge, but you're not going to get stop or package charges for those period of time. And it could be a week, it could be longer. It just depends on what kind of thing is affecting the terminal. So just so you're thinking about this and how it can be important right now, if you're a new buyer or if you're evaluating a business right now, this is the time of year where there is a lot of weather in the first few months of the year. So if you're looking at settlement statements from the past few months, it's important to consider that there could have been some revenue drop-offs from weather. So just keep that in mind. It could be a question you ask the seller, or it could just be something you're aware of. But you see it across the country. Even Nashville had a lot of snow this year, which was surprising. So this is the time of year for it, and it will affect those settlement statements, and it's just a blip in revenue volume. So for weather, there are these really defined ways of handling it. And if you're choosing to deliver in questionable conditions, it's more of just a calculus and a judgment call on your part for how you're going to do it. But sometimes there are other scenarios that are a little bit more irregular. So for example, back in 2020, there were riots and looting, across the US and a lot of major cities. And one of our routes, one of our territories is in the Magnificent Mile of downtown Chicago. And we actually had 3 different trucks that were held at gunpoint, and those trucks were stolen. We were able to recover them, but obviously that impacted our ability to deliver packages that day. So those kinds of situations are not happening every day, but they are things that you're trying to prepare for as much as you can. So when something like that happens, so you can retroactively code those, but really what you're trying to do is collect as much information as you possibly can. Generally, if it's actually a situation like that, you can use the police report and submit that to FedEx. And that's usually plenty of information for them to know that you're telling the truth. What we ended up doing in that territory actually is having an armed guard in the van with our drivers to make them feel more comfortable and to protect them in those kinds of situations. Less extreme examples is you may just have an area where it's not very safe to deliver after dark. So situations like that, you may need to create shorter routes so that your drivers can be done in a shorter amount of time. That being said, your drivers can make calls on the route. So if there's a situation that they deem a security risk, if they choose, they can code that as a security risk and not deliver the package. In that event, you will want them to take pictures and document the reasoning as much as they possibly can. And then you'll want to write the code on the box in the same way as we talked about. I'll say too, anytime you're doing these codes, even for the weather stuff where everyone knows there's snow everywhere, you'll still want drivers to take pictures and try to get as much context and documentation for submitting it to FedEx, just to make sure that they can't come back with any kind of rationale or trying to say that it wasn't a real weather condition. So you just want to go overload on info and make sure that you get it all there. So like I've been talking about, weather and the unexpected are always going to be a part of this industry. What your goal is as an owner is to plan and train your drivers, have all the best technology on your trucks to try and protect your drivers and your business. But there will just be times where you will have to decline service for the day. It's your right to do so, but there's cost to doing it. So the critical thing is that you just want to know all the information you can, take the risks into account, and make the right decision. And no matter what you decide to do, you need to be proactive and communicative with FedEx to make sure that they are aware of your plans so that they can work on a backup if needed, so that there's no kind of pointing fingers and trying to figure out what went wrong. So this is something, it's situations that are tough. You have to weigh the cost properly, but you do have the tools here. There are decisions that you have the control to make. So just wanted to take some time today to make sure you knew your options here, and that as you're an owner or for the guys who are already contractors, these are the things you can do to try to handle those kinds of situations.